What's up, guys? Welcome to Cooking with edIT. Today's episode is brought to you by Beatport. For those of you guys that don't know what Cooking with edIT is, well, I'm edIT, and this is my cooking station where I cook up or make music with all of this beautiful music hardware. Sometimes I cook up solo, like I am today, and sometimes I cook up with friends. But the idea with Cooking with edIT is to get away from using a computer and staring at a computer screen and mousing around inside of a computer and get back to basics, making music the old-fashioned way with our hands, touching all this beautiful music here, the knobs, the buttons. You know, inherently you're going to use your creativity in a completely different way than if you were to pull up your favorite plugin that you use daily inside of a computer. The energy is just different. The way that you engage with this is just different, and that's what Cooking with edIT's all about. As you embark on your gear journey, a common hurdle you might run into is that your jams might drag on, they might sound loopy, they might sound a little bit monotonous. Why is that? Well, at any one given point in time, we can only control what two hands can touch. Well, what if I told you there was a way around that we could essentially be more like the conductor of our gear orchestra and make sweeping changes with just the press of a button? Today, I'm going to demonstrate how MIDI program changes can do that. I'm going to use MIDI program changes, and we're going to change every single one of these sequencers all at the same time. It's going to make our jams a little less loopy, a little less monotonous, and a little bit more song-like, expressive, and dynamic. So I'm going to do a short jam for you guys, and then right after that, I'm going to break it down step by step what's going on. Timestamps are below. Stick around to the end. Okay, and we're back. So with that jam, it kind of sounded a little bit more song-like, right? I started with an intro, it went into this Jersey Club drop idea, then into a breakdown, came back with like a different drop that was like a little bit more mellow and trappy, and then into an outro. Now, I'm not saying that long drawn-out jams are bad by any means. I think it's dependent on what style of music you're making with your hardware. For instance, if you make techno, I think long drawn-out jams are actually good because there's so much subtlety and nuance in techno. You actually kind of want things to evolve over a much longer period of time. You kind of want to be hypnotized by the vibe, the groove, and the jam. But you don't always want that to happen. Sometimes you want things to happen quickly, and that's where MIDI program changes are actually great. Traditionally, with older synths, MIDI program changes actually change the patch on a synth. However, with modern groove boxes, drum machines, and sequencers, MIDI program changes generally tend to change the pattern. This is extremely powerful because, with Electron boxes or maybe even the Native Instruments Machine Plus, it allows us to actually arrange on the fly. Okay, so here's how this works. First and foremost, all of our gear needs to understand MIDI. It also needs to be able to send and receive MIDI program change messages. We use the analogy of myself being the conductor and I'm conducting this orchestra music gear, right? I need to designate one piece of gear to essentially be my conductor batons. That piece of gear is going to send the MIDI program change message. All the other pieces of gear are going to receive that MIDI program change message. We could look at this as this one piece of gear that's going to send the program change, that's the master, and everything else is the slave. A good, kind of rule of thumb is that the piece of gear that you're going to use to send MIDI clock to all your other pieces of gear, that's normally a good piece of gear to send the MIDI program change as well. Okay, so on my cooking station, I'm using the Squarp Apex as my quote-unquote conductor batons. This is my master. It's sending the MIDI clock and the program change messages to my Conductive Labs MRCC. This is my MIDI patch bay and router. Once the MIDI clock and program change hits that, it gets duplicated and shot out to all my other sequencers, all my Electron boxes, and all my Eurorack sequencers, the 512 vector sequencer, the Oxy 1, Squarp Hermod, IntelliGel Metropolis, even the Stolper beats. And another good rule of thumb is to basically keep your master, your conductor batons, somewhere in the center of your rig. Ergonomics are important. You kind of want to have all the things that you use the most kind of centered in the middle so that you don't have to travel far distances to tweak stuff. So on my hardware rig, I'm using the Squarp Apex as the quote-unquote conductor's baton. And the way this works is that it fires out a MIDI program change out of MIDI output D and down MIDI channel number 1. Now, in order to configure a piece of gear to receive a program change, it's pretty simple. I'll just use the Electron analog rhythm as an example. Right here, we set it to receive a program change, and then in the channels, we set it to receive a program change on MIDI channel number 1. This is the same across pretty much every single other sequencer that I have in my studio. Okay, so right now I'm going to show you how I use the Squarp Apex to send MIDI program change messages. So what we're looking at right here is each row represents a pattern. So the first row would be pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, pattern 4, so on and so forth. These patterns also correspond to the according program change number. So pattern 1 corresponds to program change number 1, pattern 2, program change number 2, pattern 3, program change number 3, so on and so forth. So if I go down this row and I start pressing these pattern buttons, technically things should change on the Native Instruments Machine Plus and the Octatrack and so on and so forth. So if I go from pattern 1 to pattern 2, there we go. Change to scene 2 on the Machine Plus, change to pattern A02 on the Octatrack, pattern 3, change to scene 3 on the Native Instruments Machine Plus, change to pattern 3 on the Octatrack. So if I keep on going, you can see all the patterns changing on all of my boxes all at once. And that's how we can use essentially MIDI program change messages to conduct our orchestra of sequencers. Okay, so right now, I'll basically fire off some of the patterns on the Squarp Apex, and you'll be able to hear how the MIDI program changes change all of my other boxes. So aside from the obvious, one thing about MIDI program changes that I really wanted to highlight is with Eurorack. Oftentimes with Eurorack sequencers, they're much smaller in size, the buttons are tiny, sometimes there might be a little bit of menu diving involved to change a pattern, and as I said before, normally you can only change maybe 2 Eurorack sequencers at a time because you only have 2 hands. However, if you have a Eurorack sequencer that accepts a MIDI program change message, all that changes. Now, if you're involved in the Electron workflow, you're probably already familiar with MIDI program change messages, and it's really no big deal. But in Eurorack, there's really not that many sequencers that can accept MIDI program changes. The 512 vector sequencer, Squarp Apex, Oxy 1, Squarp Hermod. I think those are pretty much the main ones. I know it's coming to the IntelliJ Metropolis as well soon, but that firmware hasn't dropped yet. So one thing that can be difficult to execute in Eurorack or with live hardware is automation. Now, there's no shortage of modulation possibilities in Eurorack. However, to get that modulation happen exactly when you want to can sometimes be challenging. That's why having a sequencer like the Squarp Apex is great. Right here, I just have a piece of straight line automation point to point, and that's modulating the filter cutoff on my SSF stereo dipole. That's playing out of pattern 1, and this is what it sounds like. So we can hear that filter sweep cutting upwards. Now, the power of MIDI program changes is that when I switch to pattern 8, that's going to completely change. See, now we're on pattern 8, and that value is being held. And now, if I wanted to, I could jam on it or intentionally keep it closed. So I basically made that piece of modulation happen at exactly the point in time that I wanted it to. And that's really the power of MIDI program changes with Eurorack. So there you have it, the good old MIDI program change message, a powerful little trick that allows us to change multiple sequencers all at the same time, regardless of whether they're Eurorack sequencers or traditional MIDI-only sequencers like Electron boxes. Powerful little tool to make our jams a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more expressive, and a little bit more song-like. That's what we're looking for. All right, I hope this tip helped you out. Once again, my name is edIT. You've been watching Cooking with edIT. Big thank you to Beatport today for supporting this episode. If you want to find out a little bit more about me or watch some more cookups, there should be some links in the description below. Thank you so much for tuning in.